So friends, good morning and a very warm welcome to this consultation. I would at the outset request Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, Chairman RIS, for his remarks.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome all of you. I'd like to thank in particular my friend and ex-colleague, but continues to be a colleague, Ambassador Tirumurthy, who's Secretary Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs. Notwithstanding his busy schedule, I made a strong request to him that this is a subject which has not been sufficiently explored by think tanks in Delhi or out of Delhi, and therefore I'm particularly grateful to note his presence. I'm particularly also happy to see the Secretary DST, and in fact his presence is more than substantive because the DST is the one which is funding this program that we are launching, the Research Information System for Developing Countries in the National Institute of Advanced Studies. I will not take more time because the Director General, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, will I think explain a little bit, if you like, after I speak. Speaking just for myself, I remember two instances where I wish I had more access to scientific expertise. One was when I was negotiating WTO and we looked at the genetically modified foods, and I was serving on a panel between United States and EU, and I really wish I had access to scientific expertise. We had great trouble interpreting WTO law. The public opinion in United States and EU was diametrically opposite on genetically modified food. So we finally relied on science to find a way forward. The second time, of course, is that when I was ambassador in Paris, and I'm happy to see Dr. Mukesh Kumar here. CEFIPRA is something you will be discussing in the afternoon. I think it's worthwhile looking at this because it's a very strange animal where Government of India and Government of France contribute 50% of the funds, the corpus of funds, and we have some excellent projects under CEFIPRA. Projects that touch the man in the street, not some airy-fairy, and really making great progress. So that is another example that comes to mind. But really, I don't want to take too much of time. I cannot emphasize or overemphasize the importance of science and diplomacy. The classic challenges of our times, for example, whether it is climate change, where I think we launched the Solar Alliance with France recently, or cyber security, for example. Both these challenges involve three things. One, the involvement of governments. Two, only diplomats can do something about it. But more than anything else, it has to be backed by science. Otherwise, governments and diplomats will find it very, very difficult to resolve some of these long-standing issues in climate change and cyber security. So with those few words, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for making it here. And really, the contours of science diplomacy, the best practices going to be exchanged, and the relevance of science for economic growth. I cannot think of more relevant themes that we are trying to discuss today. So thank you once again for coming. So thank you very much. I will now try my best to be MC. So if I can request Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, why don't you explain a little bit about the project before we request Secretary Economic Relations to address the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, friends. Mr. T.S. Tirumurthy, Secretary ER. Professor Ashutosh Sharma, Secretary, Department of Science and Technology and Ministry of Science and Technology. Professor D. Shobhachandran, our partner institution, RIS-NIAS, Bangalore, and friends and colleagues. It's a moment we had been waiting for long, and those of us who have been pursuing it probably would be glad to recall and I think would agree with me that science diplomacy is one area in which not only people from science but people from economics and diplomatic community have been trying to carve out a sort of detailed niche in terms of how India's own experience has evolved over the years. what are the challenges that we are facing and what kind of policy measures we can take in terms of going forward. And we have been trying to see how the issues are in terms of addressing the key challenges. And as you would agree, science technology now is being emphasized it was always there right from independence, but more so as India is preparing for the vision for New India. And how in this vision of New India, as Prime Minister has called it, social responsibility of science. At the Indian Science Congress, PM called for that scientific responsibility and connecting it with the social responsibility of science. Emphasis is also in terms of identifying the priorities within the frontier technologies and trying to connect them with several of the challenges that we have. And as you know, India has taken some measures in terms of renewables, also trying to identify cognitive sciences, and of course artificial intelligence, on which NITI and a couple of other agencies have already invoked several work programs related to that. Aiming is also in terms of bringing India up front among the top S&T leaders in the world, trying to see the new missions that are there. And in this whole process, as we are moving forward for science, the social connect is something which is being emphasized time and again, responsible research and innovation, and the initiatives that are very much there. In terms of the idea of science diplomacy, the objective is in terms of exploring capabilities and the opportunities that this specific dimension of policy making, both for diplomats and also for those who are engaged in science, that it offers. And to what extent we can leverage the wider connect with the South that India has always stood for. And from that perspective, what are the ways we can have a common perspective? And as Prime Minister has been emphasizing, we need to cross the equator. And when we have to do that, the Triangular Cooperation Partnership, TDC, is exactly the way forward, and this is being emphasized time and again. Within the ambit of science diplomacy, the issues are at multiple levels, and our objective is in terms of evolving this as a policy tool, and to what extent capacity building specific efforts are absorbed within the decision-making process when we talk about science diplomacy. As Ambassador Mohan Kumar very rightly pointed out, when the issue of GM crops came up as a conflicting area between United States, Canada, Argentina on one side and EU on the other, several issues cropped up, and EU had to bring in the precautionary principle which traditionally safeguarded several of such areas. It could not withstand the pressure from the scientific evidence. So to what extent we rely on science, it's not value neutral, and to what extent we bring in social dimension of it, and this is one area in which science diplomacy and efforts that are there in terms of opinion building have polarized. So science is no more a value neutral instrument. It requires national policies, both socio and economic, to come up front. And this is all the more clear and evident as countries are leveraging non-tariff barriers in an increasing manner. They are also bringing in new policy dimensions that are being encouraged when we talk of science diplomacy. So this project that way is going to be extremely important. I would miss a great portion if I do not recall here a great contribution that our team could receive in terms of his guidance, Dr. Baldev Raj. And he was instrumental in terms of envisaging this project, in terms of guiding us, and also co-writing the proposal. And number of his visits to Professor Ashutosh Sharma and follow up with Dr. Sadhna Relia in DST. We made several of those trips in last 2 years. when this project was going through peer review process. And I'm very glad that DST has a very strong peer review process. It took some time, but fortunately we got very good comments, and the project is much more sharpened in last 2 years. As this slide shows, there are 3 broad objectives that we are going to pursue in this project. One is in terms of capacity building in science diplomacy. Second is in terms of evolving networks in science diplomacy with the Indian scientists that are based across different institutions, different agencies, and then trying to bring in strategic thinking, as I said, and Ambassador Mohan Kumar emphasized, in terms of bringing in some of our own experiences. It is important that those experiences are collated, they are documented, and due lessons are placed before the policymakers. And that, since hasn't happened, 2 of our institutions, RIS brings in the global experience and also particular experience in WTO and other international trade, investment, and technology related areas. But NIAS has unique strength in terms of convening scientists and bringing in that dimension of our policy making. So that would be absolutely important. Before I quickly close, let me also mention here that the idea is also in terms of identifying a program to harness science diplomacy in areas of critical importance of national development, and that is extremely important. Ambassador Rana is here. Those of you who have seen a book by him, you would notice how important it is for us to document what and how we have moved forward. Ambassador Balakrishnan, in his latest book, has documented how India's missing out on human genome project could have been avoided had we evolved a policy response in the right time. So some of these observations that are there in the literature required to be collated, and our own research advisory committee at RIS has been emphasizing, Ambassador Sudhir Devre is here, chairman of our research advisory committee, that has been emphasizing that when you launch a project, bring in key minds so that whatever course correction is required is addressed right up front. So I'm very glad that today we could get some of the best brains in this area, and of course I'm also very grateful to the missions from different countries whom we have invited for this discussion. Later in the day we have a panel on learning from other countries, and some of the countries we have shortlisted. The idea in this action plan that we would have is to evolve, as I said, a network of SNT diplomats, or those diplomats who have followed science technology related issues, new linkages among NRI and PIO scientists and technocrats and institutions in India, creation of database of NRI and PIO experts in different disciplines, bringing out case studies in science diplomacy, building capacity in science diplomacy, and also trying to create policy alerts that are required in terms of drawing these attention of policymakers and trying to bridge the gaps, if at all they are there, with different agencies. With these words, sir, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chaturvedi, for that overview. I think it gives an idea about what today is all about, but also what RIS intends to do in this particular sphere. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Tirumurthy, who's not just a colleague in the Foreign Service, but also a close friend. He's now an extremely senior officer of the Indian Foreign Service, having done 33 years. But more importantly, I think he's done postings in Washington, Geneva, Jakarta, and he was our High Commissioner to Malaysia until very, very recently. I, however, would prefer to focus on his multilateral experience, where he has spent a considerable amount of time at the key level of Joint Secretary, where he ran our multilateral environment negotiations for a considerable amount of time and made a signal contribution in that area. So I can think of no better person, and not just because he happens to be Secretary ER, Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs. So Thiru, if you don't mind, it gives me enormous pleasure to kind of request you to address your keynote speech. Thank you.
Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Professor D. Subhachandran, distinguished diplomats from other countries, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly delighted to be here this morning. It is indeed a great privilege to share some thoughts on the occasion of the launch of the RIS-NIAS Science Diplomacy Program. Allow me to extend my hearty felicitations and appreciation to Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, as well as all the others in RIS and NIAS who have conceived of such a program, which is undoubtedly a pioneering one. And considering that this is an area which has not received adequate focus, it is also a very timely one. My initial hesitation was due to the fact that I have a commerce, accounts, management, and law background, and I was convinced that you got the wrong person to talk about science. But Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar assured me the fact that I have some knowledge of diplomacy will obfuscate my lack of background in science. Friends, science has always been part and parcel of our diplomacy one way or another. I still remember that one of the first things that I had to do when I joined as a young undersecretary for Bhutan in the ministry was to prepare a cabinet note on a transmission line project in Bhutan. Consequently, I had to approach an engineer colleague, sit with him, and understand what terms like substation, direct torque control, step-up transformer, step-down transformer, etc. meant before I could start examining the cost escalation issues. When I was posted to Geneva after this stint in the ministry, I was put in charge of the climate change negotiations, where I started grappling with the likes of carbon dioxide and methane, carbon concentrations, carbon sinks, evapotranspiration, IPCC scientific reports which talked about Clausius-Clapeyron equation, etc. Since one had to understand the science of climate change before getting into the diplomacy of climate change. And more recently, when I came back to climate change negotiation in 2011, I had to relearn a lot of climate change science once again, particularly shale gas, fracking, cracking, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, vis-a-vis hydrofluorocarbons, carbon black in the Arctic, etc. And these were not isolated cases. I was also fortunate to deal closely with 5 neighboring countries during my career. And when you deal with neighboring countries, we are accosted with science and technology issues on an almost daily basis, where your diplomatic skills are truly tested. However, I haven't come to speak about how to educate a diplomat in science. It's just that the understanding science and its application has become an essential tool for diplomats to succeed in their work. And this is where we need to salute the foresight of our founding fathers, who saw science and technology as an integral component of nation building. Since we inherited this wonderful legacy, science and technology has come to occupy a critical place in our diplomatic work. And this I realized as a probationer when I joined service. When we had a lecture from the then US ambassador who was invited to address us. The US ambassador read out a list of science and technology projects which India was collaborating with the US, turned to us and said that while India was supposed to be a developing country, when he saw the list of S&T collaborations we have been having with the United States, he wasn't quite sure where India belonged, since the US didn't have such collaboration even with some of the developed countries. I'm always reminded of this conversation when I look at some of the tremendous advances which India has made in the realm of science and technology innovation, and feel proud that we, as diplomats, can reach out to other countries on equal terms to take science diplomacy forward. Initially, it was quite natural that we were probably more into accessing and acquiring expertise in science and technology from the West, rather than sharing them with others, particularly in the developing world. In this, our Department of Science and Technology has played an extremely important role. In fact, I half jokingly used to mention that if the government of India had imposed a condition on our scientists and other R&D experts that 50% of our foreign travel should be to developing countries, we may have had a more robust collaboration much earlier with many of the developing countries as well in this important area. But then the landscape has changed dramatically in the last decade or more. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last few years, there is no doubt that India's prowess in science and technology has come into its own, and we have been able to reach out to countries cutting across the developed and the developing world. Our cooperation in this area ranged from collaboration with R&D organizations, in joint projects, with corporate enterprises, as well as with leading academic and S&T institutions. Rapid growth within India in telecommunications, IT, biotechnology, nuclear technology, nanotechnology, space, ocean sciences, and other cutting-edge technology has only served to enhance our reach in the modern world. Bilateral agreements on science and technology have been inked, not just with India's traditional partners, but with many countries in the developing world as well. In this science diplomacy, our Ministry for Science and Technology and the various specialized technical departments of the government have played a very crucial role. I thank the Department of Science and Technology for sponsoring this important initiative of RIS and NIAS. However, while we appreciate the advances in our cooperation with other countries in S&T for our mutual benefit, the term science diplomacy is slightly narrower in its remit than our traditional understanding of science and technology cooperation. Science diplomacy, in my opinion, is more about the conscious use of science as a tool of foreign policy, or foreign policy as a tool of science. The question is whether we are consciously using science for diplomacy, or whether it is unconscious, or would have happened in any case due to domestic and international compulsions. The result of this project of RIS and NIAS should be to enhance the conscious use of science and technology as a tool of diplomacy and vice versa. The good news is that our science diplomacy has had a head start since it rests on some basic principles, one of which is that we have never hesitated to share our strengths in S&T with any country. This has not always been so with respect to developed countries. In fact, they have usually been very reluctant to share their technological innovations and have even placed barriers. But India has truly believed and implemented the principle of sharing. For example, international cooperation and peaceful use of space technology, and by definition, space diplomacy, are ingrained in the DNA of the Indian Space Research Organization. It may be recalled that in the 60s, the legendary Vikram Sarabhai, he positioned the Tumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Station as an international facility for launching sounding rockets. And scientists from the US, Soviet Union, France, the UK, and West Germany used this facility in Kerala to launch experimental sounding rockets. And recently, the successful launch of our South Asian satellite on board the GSLV is a clear reminder of our desire to share the fruits of our technological prowess with all countries of the world. We don't need any diplomacy here. All that we need is a large heart and a commitment to humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. R. Chidambaram, an eminent scientist and principal scientific advisor to the Government of India, while writing the foreword to a recent pioneering book entitled Technology and International Relations, written by one of our esteemed and respected colleagues in the Indian Foreign Service, Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, who is right here, and I just told him when I met him that I'm so glad that he wrote a book, one of its kind book, so that I can borrow all that he has written and put it in my speech. Dr. R. Chidambaram mentioned that we must remember that technology domination has been sought both by countries and by companies through the mechanisms of intellectual property rights and technology control regimes. He goes on to say that today, more than at any time in history, technology is power. And this will continue to be so in the foreseeable future. This is where India is relevant, because India is different. Science diplomacy has become the tool to break these barriers of technology domination. Indian diplomacy, they say, has usually punched well above its weight. This has partly been due to our adherence to certain values, both as a nation as well as in our international relations. But it has also been due to the innate strength of India as a knowledge hub, which inter alia is palpable in the field of science and technology. The debate of the 70s and 80s on acquisition of technology and access to technology from the north to the south has now transformed to collaboration in science and technology, with countries like India taking the leadership in areas such as nuclear energy, IT, space, biotechnology, oceanography, etc. In our quest for self-reliance in S&T areas, science diplomacy has played and continues to play an important role. An important example is how India has managed to navigate the NPT and the CTBT negotiations and protect our interests for future generations. And as the speed and pace of changes in S&T explodes, so will the need for science diplomacy to be nimble and negotiators to be constantly ahead of the curve to be effective. Another dimension of our sharing is that as a part of our South-South cooperation, a matter on which RIS has given considerable focus, we have made conscious effort to reach out to countries in the South and use technology, science, and innovation as developmental diplomacy to address the needs of the people through their application. For example, there is a great demand for Indian assistance to set up IT centers in Africa and other countries. Our iTech training program has become one of the largest in the world, where much of the training is in scientific and technological areas. Prime Minister has just announced 500 training slots for our development partners in solar energy at the International Solar Alliance Founding Conference, and has also announced his intention to launch a national solar technology mission with an international focus. This is science diplomacy in action. Another example of science diplomacy is the success we have had subsequent to the India-Africa Forum Summit in 2008, where we pledged support to Africa in the areas of science and technology. The C.V. Raman Fellowship for African scientists and researchers has received tremendous reception among the African countries, and now many countries in Africa are availing of this fellowship to further their own capacity in this important area. We are indeed proud that a pioneering initiative in this matter has met with immediate success. The 2018 India Science and Research Fellowship Scheme will provide fully paid scholarships and fellowships to researchers, scientists, and academics from neighbors to undertake R&D work. The Pan-African e-network set up by India for telemedicine and teleeducation is being revamped, and after it met with success since its establishment in 2009 in Africa. These and several other initiatives only serve to reinforce the principle of sharing ingrained in our ethos. Whether we look at science for diplomacy or diplomacy for science, India is in a particularly unique position to undertake both. And as many diplomats have now started to realize, science diplomacy has the potential to bring countries together even when politically they may have differences. One is even tempted to say that greater understanding in S&T between countries can strengthen the forces of peace and security in today's world. This is partly because science and technology has unleashed forces, and I'm talking about benign and constructive forces, which cannot be controlled merely by a nation state, but needs international collaboration to fully harness them and to fully tap into their potential to enhance the quality of human life in every part of the globe. Consequently, science diplomacy will have to deal with forces beyond the control of just a nation state, where international collaboration becomes a compulsion and not a choice. In this scenario, nations are compelled to come together in peace and deal with such issues in a spirit of cooperation. To paraphrase the British playwright William Congreve, science hath charms to soothe a savage breast. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly delighted that the RIS and NIAS are undertaking this pioneering effort. There is need to evaluate where we have reached, take course corrections where required, and enhance focus where necessary, and chart out new directions where possible. At a time when our government is launching various initiatives in S&T and in the digital sphere, including the Technology Mission 2035 vision of the Prime Minister, as well as inviting entrepreneurs, youngsters, corporate houses, international partners, and companies to invest in India and take initiatives for transfer of technology. And when our missions respond to this call and reach out to our counterparts in other countries, we once again underline the importance of science diplomacy and make a conscious effort to use foreign policy for science and science for foreign policy. How we can focus the future of science diplomacy will also have a direct bearing on how we can achieve and help others achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. I thank you all once again for giving me an opportunity to say a few words and wish you all success in your project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tirumurthy. I thought that was a broad brush masterclass actually on what the Government of India's perspective on science and technology is. May I now request Professor Ashutosh Sharma, but let me also say that it goes without saying that today's event would not be possible without the support of the Department of Science and Technology. And I do not see this program succeeding without the complete support and commitment of the Department of Science and Technology. I'm going to be politically incorrect, maybe because I've retired from the Government of India, unlike Ambassador Tirumurthy, who is still in service. I think this Indian tendency to say that science is too important a matter to be left to scientists is, I think, something that we must depart from as a paradigm. I would go to the extent of saying science is actually too important to be left to non-scientists and bureaucrats. And that's really the key role that I see for Department of Science and Technology. I thought Ambassador Tirumurthy, towards the end of his speech, referred to Sustainable Development Goals. And I was trying to see the number of SDGs last night when I was just going through the 17 SDGs. I was trying to see how many of them will depend completely on how we use science, technology, and innovation. And absolutely 70% of the SDGs are highly dependent on what the Department of Science and Technology can do. You can cry yourself hoarse by saying that we are going to do this, we are going to do that. But unless you use science and technology and innovation for achieving those goals, you're not going to be anywhere near the picture. So I think it's absolutely vital that we have DST on board. This is why I'm particularly grateful to Professor Ashutosh Sharma for being here today. I would like him to tell us how he sees the Department of Science and Technology contributing not just for this project, but to the larger achievement of SDGs. Professor Sharma, you have the floor, sir.
Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar, Chairman RIS, Mr. T.S. Tirumurthy, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Professor Subha Chandran from NIAS. Distinguished panelists today, ladies and gentlemen. We already heard a very deep analysis of science diplomacy coming from Dr. Mohan Kumar and Mr. Tirumurthy. They have pretty much covered everything that I wanted to say, but still I would say a few things, maybe in different words. Of course, we are all delighted at the launch of this good project in cooperation of RIS and NIAS. And since this is about science diplomacy, so clearly we have both of them on board, the diplomacy aspects from RIS and scientific aspects from NIAS. NIAS is a very unique scientific institution in that it's autonomous, not just on paper, but really also in spirit. It's located in the best of place in Indian Institute of Science campus, so it can leverage very large number of human resources, library, connectivity, really the global connectivity. So I'm very happy that two of you are working together to give a very big push to science diplomacy aspects. A joint program in that, and certainly DST is very happy to support this initiative and will continue to enlarge on this initiative in the future as well, because it truly deserves much more than what it has been receiving in the past. Clearly, science becomes more global. The connectedness of science and society becomes stronger than ever, and that's because of the shared future of humanity. I'll come to that in a moment. But looking at, well, RIS, so RIS is Research and Information Systems for developing countries. So I asked Ambassador Mohan Kumar about what is the definition of a developing country, or is it the same as a developing society as a whole? So of course we use this word developing country perhaps in the sense of some economic measures. It could be overall GDP. I know one country that told us that, look, I mean, India is a developed country because of the GDP. But you can also look at the view of per capita income, and that would lead to some other conclusion. But the point is, and of course, Ambassador Mohan Kumar said that the tech developing country is basically by nomination or self-nomination, largely, right. But I think development has many aspects, it has many dimensions. It's not only related to per capita income, but related to cultural aspects, it's related to societal aspects, it's related to infrastructural aspects, it's related to science and technology, power and infrastructure and human resources, is related to gender equality, is related to many different things. And not all of them can be equated to each other automatically. So that one has to take a closer view of what actually we mean by developing and so on. The reason this is important is if you look at women in science, and especially women in technology, so one would think that the developed countries, according to per capita, would be far ahead of India. But that's probably not true. So we in fact had a meeting, we have a meeting on women in science or empowering women in science, and we had a trilateral meeting. We had a meeting of 6 nations. This trilateral meeting was UK, Australia, and India. And I was happy or unhappy to note that actually all the 3 countries have very similar problem when it comes to looking at women in science and technology. So that clearly means that not everything correlates with per capita income, and there are issues in science and technologies which are rather global. So we can certainly learn from each other, even though the cultural context may be different. So if you look at Japan, if you look at South Korea, China, India, and then go west, you would see that there is a persistence of many issues wherever the science interfaces with society. As far as science itself is concerned, it's rather value neutral. So of course I heard what Professor Chaturvedi said. They said, well, science is not value neutral, which is very true. When the science interfaces with the society, it's no longer value neutral. But the reason you can work together as scientists across the globe is because of the value neutrality of science. So we share the same language, the same equations, the same faith in the methods of science, the same kind of infrastructure for doing similar work, the same cutting edge problems, the same aspirations of science, the clubs of science, and so on. It becomes very global. So that's a good thing, because it's easy to relate with other countries through science and technology. Technology, of course, a whole lot of it is also local, but science is truly global. So that has an advantage that if, for example, if you want to renormalize your relations with a country, scientists could be the stormtroopers. So you go in there, you soften it a little bit, and present a good public face saying, look, things are happening together, and they indeed happen together rather spontaneously. So without bringing in social connects, without bringing in deep political connects, there could be divergences on many fronts, but it's a lot easier to work in the domain of science together, in fact have common objectives and goals and so on. And so this is the reason that in fact DST is able to work so strongly with 80 plus countries. We engage rather strongly in the processes of science, in working together in collaborative science. And in fact with 40 plus countries, this relationship is very strong. Well, of course, it was pointed out that India is rather large-hearted in sharing its science and its technology, globally. But there is a critical difference between how the ownership of science in India happens and in many other countries. Much of the ownership of science and technology in the so-called developed countries, it lies with the private sector. So government plays only the role of making the larger policy frameworks, and the rest of science and technology is all done by companies, by industry, by corporations, and they hold all the strings. In India, on the other hand, nearly 80% of R&D investments in the country are made by the government. And we got organizations which have a very different character. For example, National Innovation Foundation. So their mandate actually is to look at the diversity of appropriate technology, the grassroots technology, the inclusive technology, go talk to hundreds of thousands of stakeholders like farmers, school children, women, rural folks, and so on. And they look at these things which may be appropriate, the ideas which are appropriate for Indian society, and translate that into technology, even take IPRs on it and so on. But the point is that all of these ideas are in a sense controlled by government. So it is not a problem actually to share these ideas, for example, with other countries that have similar requirements, similar objectives and so on, and similar kind of societies and their needs. And that in fact is what is being done with several African nations and some of our neighbors, that many of these inventions could be appropriate in their context, and we are very willing to share them with whoever would want to engage in that domain. Now, it was pointed out that science diplomacy and diplomacy for science, they are a little bit different things. Of course, we understand the difference. Science diplomacy, well, in general, I would think of this as reaching out to other countries with information, with knowledge, with resources, with infrastructure that we have, offer it to them so that it impacts the larger engagement, larger diplomatic engagement, larger societal engagement. Science diplomacy, in a sense, has to be driven very strongly by scientists and by science, by diplomats taking appropriate participation. Diplomacy for science, of course, has to be primarily driven by diplomats, and taking help of scientists in there. When you think about permutation combinations of these two words, science and diplomacy, you can think of two more words, the scientific diplomacy, which means that the evidence-based way of doing diplomacy. I've not heard this before, but just thinking of permutation combination of the two words, science and diplomacy. So there, I don't know if there is unscientific diplomacy, so I guess all of diplomacy is scientific, and so that may be a redundant word. There could also be a diplomatic science. Diplomatic science is what bureaucrats of science do, but as was pointed out, that science is too important to be left to people who are not scientists. But there is such a thing as a diplomatic science. Is basically about selling the science, which is an important aspect of doing science, for raising resources for it and so on. Anyway, we are focusing more on international cooperation and scientific diplomacy being a part of it. So we said, why do we need international cooperation? It's very clear in the domain of science and technology. To a scientist like me, and also a bureaucrat of science like me, it's very clear that we need very strong international cooperation, collaboration. It brings real value to our society, to our nation. Even outside of diplomacy, it brings huge value. Of course, it brings huge values because we can learn from the experiences of others, and that's the most important thing. I mean, having done international cooperation for about nearly 3 decades, you can see that about 20% of our scientific publications from India are co-authored by a foreign author. What basically means is that there has been an engagement in science and technology, a very compelling engagement over many decades. Of course, our scientists have been going abroad in very large numbers. They have been getting training there, have been doing PhD, postdocs, being scientists there and so on, and bring that value back to India in many different ways, even if they don't work here. Of course, many of them come back and bring value with them, but even if they don't stay here, they bring huge amount of value by their connects, by their information, knowledge, and wisdom. So that has been a very positive aspect of working internationally. As was pointed out, now we live in a globally connected world. The Sustainable Development Goals, for example, bind all the nations together. Concerns such as environment, such as climate, such as water, energy security, human resources and their mobility across borders, all of that, food security, and now the rise of communication and information systems which respect no man-made political boundaries. Facebook is, all the social media is a very good example of that. And the rise of cyber systems and cyber physical systems, they bind all the nations more strongly than ever before. So our concerns truly in science and technology become global, the challenges become global, and so therefore working together, there is absolutely no option to working together and learning from each other. So science and technology has indeed become the integrator of the world, and the speed of communication today makes it not only possible for that integration to happen on unprecedented scale, but it becomes really necessary for that integration to happen very naturally. This is not just financial sector, but like all other sectors of science and technology that we talked about. The rise of cyber systems and cyber physical systems poses special global challenges. I'm not sure that this is in Sustainable Development Goals, and it's not, the verdict is still out on whether cyber physical systems would lead to greater sustainability or less sustainability, or would you require different policy interventions to provide a level playing field and make it more sustainable across the board. So one important thing about international cooperation in science and technology in modern times is really the ease of doing business. When I started my scientific career, started my PhD in 82, 83, that's the first time I used email. This was actually an experimental system put up by DARPA and say, well, I can communicate to my friends who are going to different universities. Right, and so there are, two sides to every technology. So I jokingly say, well, technology is a quest to solve one problem and then create another, so that, technology always remains in business and would never really go out of it. But having said that, so email is one of those things. So I said to myself, this is going to simplify my life. Okay, and now here we are, I don't know, 35 years down the road. And I really feel at times, that I've become complete slave of the means of communication that we have at our disposal today. And this connectedness, which comes with social media, which comes with cell phone, which comes with email, and so on, and the explosion of knowledge in internet, all of that put together, well, it brings certain other aspects of technology in focus as well. But the point is, today we can do R&D remotely. So it is not necessary for international cooperation for people to have very large number of meetings or physical meetings and have these traditional models of cooperation which heavily emphasize workshops, face-to-face meetings, living together, and so on. All of that is really not required. In fact, it's even counterproductive, and one can do very sensible, very compelling research together, science together, long distance, right? And that is very clear. I've had about half a dozen projects which were done remotely. So we don't require actually the model that was in the time of Hardy and Ramanujan. I'm sure that Ramanujans today could be discovered much more easily. And we must leverage that positive aspect of connectedness and communication in all our international dealings. We are moving in that direction, but not as fast as we should. And I look at these processes every day. I say, well, there are a large number of these face-to-face physical meetings that happen, which are required, but only once in a while. And to figure out actually to make friends, to have trust, to have confidence. But after that, this can really be put on autopilot on remote. Other thing that we emphasize in our international engagement is so-called mega science. Now, mega science is something like CERN, like 30-meter telescope, and so on. These projects are too big to be funded entirely by a single country, and they are also too big to be used by a single country, because a single country may only have a handful of scientists to be able to make use of that resource. So clearly, these are the projects, these are the mega projects on which large number of countries cooperate. And by putting in a small amount of support, you actually get a lot more out of it. So it's like, even though it's one, is one facility shared by 10 nations, but really each one of these nations has full access to all the resources of that facility as if you own it. These are some of the things that that one wants to push. LIGO is one example that India is participating in, one of the most recent examples. Another example is FAIR, which is coming up in Germany. This is called anti-proton ion research, a huge project with a lot of, what do you call it, the time and cost overrun. So this is another aspect of engaging globally, especially in mega projects, and which is where actually diplomacy is of great use. So the science actually goes only that far. We can't really control, after making scientific plans, about how those plans are executed in a foreign country. This is where our Ministry of External Affairs need to be very proactive, working with us and saying, look, here is the interest of the country that needs to be safeguarded. Of course, I guess the job of a diplomat is very tough, especially if you are posted in a foreign country. you have to watch out for the interest of that country as well as your own country, which is India, of course, and to strike a balance in saying, look, how do we, the country reaches out to the other country and make meaningful connections. That's very important. Now, India actually has very deep strengths in science and technology today. It's not is underappreciated fact. Again, it is related to the fact that we are called developed country or developing country, not developed country. So the image actually is, you say, look, oh, it must be also so in science and technology. Actually, in scientific publications today, we are number 6 in the world. If you look at the output, which basically correlates with the level of scientific activity, the intensity of activity in the country. The output is measured by, let's say, number of scientific publications. We are number 6. And we are growing at a rate of 14% annually as opposed to 4% growth rate globally. So what that means is when I extrapolate it, within next 5 years, we would be close to number 3. Maybe not 5, then 7 years for sure. We would be number 3 in the world in terms of the scientific knowledge which is put out by our scientists. This despite many constraints, both of resources of different kinds, the human resources as well as the financial resources that back it up. But this is a very good positive news. So there will be number 3, but of course the bad news is we would stay number 3 for a very long time after that, behind China and US in that order. So what that means is we have deep scientific strengths. The weakness that we have is not in invention. The weakness actually is innovation. So what that means is that all the knowledge which is being generated does not easily get into industry, does not easily get scaled up, does not easily translate into societal use, right? And this is where I think that we could learn from other countries about how to translate more effectively our inventions into innovations. Anyway, I would complete my talk very quickly by saying that, of course, we are connecting strongly and we have the desire to connect even more strongly with neighboring countries, ASEAN, African countries, so on, countries that share aspirations and needs of the kind of technology which is appropriate for us, the technology that we have. Just the last thing I want to point out is it's been a long time, over a century, that Indian scientists have been going abroad in search for knowledge, in search for cutting edge in science and technology. Today, we have the people, we have the infrastructure in science and technology, and we have the confidence to now invite the best of global science and technology to the country. So time has come that all our mega projects should also be open for international participation. And every time we put in a big project now, I urge our scientists to put in an international component to have effective lobbying in order to attract foreign entities, scientists, organizations, governments, to support those mega projects, participate in them, make use of them, and benefit from them. Also, we have started a new scheme called Vajra in Department of Science and Technology, which supports integrating the best of global scientists, professors, coming to India and integrating and working here. Idea is very simple. People who have commitment of some kind, both NRIs and other people, they could spend 1 to 3 months in India every year, minimum 1 month. They co-guide PhD students. They are counted as adjunct faculty here. So, for all practical purposes, they get integrated with the system. They have commitments here, and they see value in being associated with that institute. So while they are not here physically, of course, like I said, the scientific collaboration, of course, continues remotely. that includes co-guiding of PhD students, raising research funds, and so on. There was an overwhelming response to our first call to Vajra faculty. Within 1 month of opening the portal, we received about 250 applications and nominations from very good scientists across the world. We could select 45 of those in the first round, and the idea is to scale it up to about 1,000, which means any given year there should be 1,000 very good top scientists from around the world coming and visiting in India, but not just visiting, but owning up a part of our scientific ecosystem, which is working together and remaining actually a committed member of our scientific system. So I urge all of you to spread this word in your own countries, embassies, and so on. We should give it big popularity to this program. This could be a game changer, because not only in terms of the science and technology that we bring, but the new connects that we make, the connects which are not superficial, which is not somebody coming in, giving 2 lectures and going away and not remembering it after 1 year, but connects which are very deep, and also the cultural transformations which are needed in science and technology, especially for our young generation. So all of that is in the offing. I want to again thank RIS and NIAS working together on this very important program, which is a very positive direction, and that, like I said, I reiterate that we want to actually take it even to a higher level. So if you put up any proposals in the future, certainly that would be considered very seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will certainly take you up on your offer for proposals, especially with huge financial implications, so that Department of Science and Technology can fund us. Jokes aside, I found it very interesting. I was just struck by one point that you made about the involvement of governments in innovation, technology and innovation. And you made this point that in India, the government continues to play an important part, while in some other countries it may not be the case. I invite everybody's attention to a very small book which has been written by an economist, Italian economist called Mariana Mazzucato, which is called The Entrepreneurial State. Please go through it, because most of you have your iPhones thinking that it is Mr. Steve Jobs who has discovered this bloody thing, but actually it is the Department of Defense, United States, which actually has spent a whole lot of money coming up with each and every invention that constitutes an iPhone. So she makes this counterintuitive point that it is the governments which have actually contributed innovation over the last 20 years, including the United States. It's not the private sector. So I am a great believer that it is the governments, and therefore I look to Department of Science and Technology. It is another matter that I think we should know how to use the funds and so on. You made a number of observations about how program particular pertinent funding can happen, but I think I want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that it is the governments, especially in the future, and that is where I think China has scored over the rest of the government. So with those few words, it gives me great pleasure now. This may be the vote of thanks, but I would have to say that without the National Institute of Advanced Studies collaborating with RIS, we would be unable to do anything of this kind. So it is entirely appropriate that I request Professor Subha Chandran to actually give the vote of thanks for this morning. Thank you. Yes, please speak from here.
Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Professor Sharma, Ambassador Tirumurthy, Professor Sachin, friends from the diplomatic and strategic community in Delhi, or to use Ambassador Kumar's parlance, should I address scientists and non-scientists in this hall. Let me thank on behalf of my institution, NIAS and RIS, for being here with us for this launch. And a special thanks from us, both NIAS and RIS, to Ambassador Tirumurthy and Professor Sharma for those excellent points from the S&T side and the diplomatic side, and kickstarting this launch program. Thank you, Ambassador Tirumurthy, and thank you, Professor Sharma. I would Also like to thank especially Professor Sachin and Ambassador Kumar for getting NIAS also as a part of the program. I think it's a long way to go. We have made a good beginning. So let's see where it takes us. And a special thanks, though Dr. Baldev Raj is no more with us. He's the one in NIAS who was the initial brain and the engine on science and diplomacy project. I was just a cub at the NIAS then. I just joined, so he asked me about this science and diplomacy. So I told him I have IR background, I am a Pakistan chap. What would I do to use Ambassador Kumar's point? I'm a totally non-scientist. What will I do with the science and diplomacy project? Then he was the one who said, no, you have IR, we have science, let's do it together. I thank him somewhere here. I'm sure he should be happy listening to us. And every time I remember he comes to RIS or he goes to NIAS, from here he will call us. We used to really be afraid of the new points in getting into those proposal. The proposal went multiple iterations before it finally went. I especially thank Dr. Baldev Raj, who is not here with us, and a special thanks to the DST, especially Professor Ashutosh Sharma and Dr. Sadhana Rilia and a few more in the DST. I remember 2 years back when I came to, I don't know whether Professor Sachin remember, I came to receive you and Ambassador Shyam Saran in the airport in Bangalore. We didn't realize 2 years back that it would come a reality in 2018. This was in 2016. Now it's becoming a reality today. I don't know how we will be in 2020. We sincerely hope that this momentum builds further. And I especially like, Professor Sachin, what you said the last time when we met. This should become an independent program, independent initiative, in Professor Sharma's word, maybe a game changer for us and for rest of us. I sincerely wish that we will take it forward. And on this point, I think at NIAS, we see it as a part of a triad. One, we have the science communication project. I think Pallav would know it. He was a part of Dr. Baldev Raj on science communication, one set of people working on science communication. The other people are at the institute working on science outreach, and we are going to work on science diplomacy. We sincerely hope these triad will take us to the larger vision that Dr. Baldev Raj had, that to have a global science dialogue in Bangalore, like the RIS-NIAS dialogue in Delhi and the Gateway House dialogue on economic dialogue in Mumbai, a science dialogue or S&T dialogue in Bangalore. If it happens, I think we would love to partner with RIS and Professor Sachin on that. Let's hope that vision materializes and we take it forward. And I sincerely would like to invite all of you for the second round of dialogue in Bangalore in NIAS sometime in the near future. With that note, let me thank once again everyone who is here for being with us for the launch. And we sincerely hope maybe 2 years down the lane, we come back and do as Ambassador Tirumurthy talked about, another iteration. Thank you again for being with us. Special thanks to Professor Sachin and Ambassador Kumar for getting us a part of it.
Thank you very much. We'll break for coffee and reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you.